Caffeine is the most widely consumed psychoactive drug in the world. Its medicinal use is limited, and whilst it can be addictive, excessive intake has only minor negative consequences on health. The most widely known effect of caffeine is that it reduces sleepiness. Wake up and smell the coffee. Caffeine is produced naturally by coffee, tea, and cocoa plants, and is consumed by a wide range of different ages and ethnic groups. In 2005, coffee was the world's 7th largest legal agricultural export. As a social drink, coffee has been consumed in the Islamic world for nearly 1,000 years. It became popular in Britain through the efforts of the British East India Company, as the first coffee houses were opened in London in 1652. It quickly became popular throughout Europe. For many people, caffeine is the lifestyle drug of choice, and much time and effort is taken over its preparation. To make coffee, beans are first roasted. Different roasting methods result in a variety of characteristic flavors, as molecules in the beans are altered to a greater or lesser extent depending on the temperature. After roasting, the beans are finely ground to increase their surface area. As hot water is poured through the ground coffee, it dissolves many chemical compounds present. It is said that when making a perfect cup of coffee, the water temperature is critical. If the temperature is too low, the coffee will be too weak and will have a sour flavor. If the temperature is too high, then the coffee will taste bitter as more unpalatable compounds are dissolved. Many other chemical compounds are dissolved from the coffee grounds as they brew. For example, derivatives of quinic acid have been shown to have beneficial effects in the treatment of hepatitis B. 5-quinide can cause diverse effects such as analgesia, sedation, and nausea. Fortunately, at the very low concentrations found in coffee, these effects are rarely, if ever, noticed. Caffeine itself was discovered and isolated by a German chemist, Friedrich Ferdinand Runge, in 1819. It is a relatively small organic compound in which the atoms are held together by covalent bonds. In order to understand this, we need to take a look at the chemistry. This is hydrogen, the first element in the periodic table. It has one positively charged proton in the nucleus and one negatively charged electron orbiting. The electron orbits the nucleus so quickly that its location is often described as an electron cloud. The second element in the periodic table is helium. It has 2 protons and 2 neutrons in the nucleus, and 2 electrons orbiting. Carbon has 6 protons and 6 neutrons in the nucleus. Six electrons occupy 2 distinct orbitals. Carbon is perhaps the most important element in nature, as it forms more chemical compounds than all the other elements put together. Carbon forms compounds with covalent bonds. These are formed when electron clouds on neighboring atoms overlap. Here, 4 hydrogen atoms bond with a carbon atom to form a molecule of methane. Carbon atoms can form covalent bonds with many different elements, including hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Because of this, it is able to form the complex compounds found in nature, such as caffeine. Caffeine is an unusual organic compound. The electronegative oxygen atoms, colored red, make it hydrophilic, or water-loving. It dissolves easily in water. The flat fused ring system which forms the body of a caffeine molecule is made of carbon and nitrogen atoms, colored green and blue respectively. These fused rings are hydrophobic, or water-fearing. This dual nature allows caffeine molecules to pass easily through membranes in the body in a process called passive diffusion. Sucrose, in the form of sugar, is very hydrophilic because it has many polar hydroxy groups, shown here in red and white. Sucrose cannot cross the lipid cell membranes unaided. It needs help and relies on an active transport mechanism in order to pass into the bloodstream. This active transport takes longer than the passive diffusion experienced by caffeine, and explains why, if you go out for coffee and cake, the sugar rush happens after the caffeine hit. Once the coffee has brewed, we take a drink. The liquid travels down the esophagus to the stomach and then onto the intestine. Microscopic protrusions on the surface of the intestines, called villi, increase the surface area of the intestinal wall by up to 500 times, and thus the potential for absorption increases. Within just 45 minutes of drinking a cup of coffee, the caffeine is absorbed into the bloodstream. Cell membranes are made from a raft of lipids and some membrane-bound proteins formed into a bilayer. The partial hydrophobic nature of caffeine allows easy passage through these layers. After crossing the cell membrane of the villi, across a lipid bilayer, the caffeine then passes through the interior of the cell. This contains the nucleus, rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, centrioles, lysozyme, vesicles, mitochondria, ribosomes, and Golgi apparatus. The caffeine then passes out of the cell and into the capillary vessels, beginning its journey throughout the body. About half of our blood is made up of red blood cells. White blood cells and platelets are also suspended in the aqueous blood plasma. Many other chemicals are transported throughout the body dissolved in blood plasma, such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, waste products, and of course our caffeine. The blood-brain barrier regulates the chemicals that pass into the brain. Cells in the blood-brain barrier are held together with tight junctions, and most molecules in the bloodstream require some sort of active transport to pass through. This is not the case for caffeine. Because of its relatively small size and partial hydrophobic nature, it is able to pass through the blood-brain barrier easily and rapidly reach the brain. In the brain, long, thin dendrites extend from neurons and carry electrical impulses. These are responsible for passing signals throughout the brain. Neurons pass messages to other neurons by releasing special chemicals called neurotransmitters from synapses at the ends of the dendrites. One such neurotransmitter is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Once released from a synapse, it is dephosphorylated 3 times as it comes into contact with particular proteins on cell walls. After losing the first phosphate group, it becomes adenosine diphosphate. On losing the second phosphate group, it becomes adenosine monophosphate. Finally, after losing the third phosphate group, it becomes adenosine. Caffeine's effects on us are in large part down to its ability to block the interaction of adenosine with adenosine receptors. Both compounds share close structural similarities, in particular the 5 and 6 membered fused rings. Adenosine provokes many responses throughout the body, but in the brain, one of its main effects is to make us feel sleepy. The adenosine receptors consist of 7 protein helices, which span the cell membrane. They form a binding site into which neurotransmitters and other chemicals can dock. These receptors allow signals to be passed from the outside to the inside of a cell. Caffeine's shape is so similar to that of adenosine that it is able to bind to the receptor in its place. In doing so, caffeine acts as an antagonist, preventing adenosine from binding and from activating the receptor, as shown here. It therefore reduces the effects of adenosine, making us feel more alert. Adenosine receptors are distributed widely throughout the brain. The striatum is part of the basal ganglia system located in the middle of the brain, sometimes referred to as the reward center. Adenosine receptors here are responsible for the psychoactive effects of caffeine, the feelings of mild euphoria and well-being. The effect of alertness comes from its action at receptors in the hypothalamus. The effects of caffeine are felt at adenosine receptors throughout the body. They include dilation of bronchioles in the lungs, increased heart rate, constriction of blood vessels, and reduction of pain all over the body. Caffeine is metabolized or broken down in the liver into 3 main compounds by the removal of methyl groups. These are paraxanthine, theobromine, a compound also found in chocolate, and theophylline, which is used as a treatment for asthma. Each of these metabolites contribute to the overall effects of caffeine. Eventually, these too are metabolized before being excreted in the urine. The time taken for the body to eliminate caffeine varies from person to person. The effects of caffeine on the human body are wide-ranging and complex. It acts as a stimulant, helps us concentrate, keeps us awake, dilates bronchioles, constricts blood vessels, and increases heart rate. However, it can also be addictive, cause anxiety and insomnia. Although we have been imbibing caffeine for centuries, the mechanisms of its interactions in our bodies are still not fully understood.